Welcome to Old Path and our study through the New Testament, currently in the book of Matthew. We are in chapter 8 today. We're going to take a look at two separate incidents, I guess you could say, or occasions, things that happened as Matthew lays them out, and they'll be familiar to you. Actually, I think both of them will be. And but there are some really amazing things, and I know I did this last week, and I will do so again this week by looking at the parallel accounts in the other Gospels, because these are great examples of putting all three accounts together. You get a really good understanding of what happens, because you get additions in each of the Gospels that really help you to expand the view of it. And so none of it's contradictory. All of it is just adding elements of information. So excluding information doesn't mean it's a contradiction. It just simply means that the person that's narrating it and telling you what took place might have information that the other ones didn't put in, but none of it contradicts. It's not that one says one thing and one says another that puts them at odds. It's rather that they add information. So when you put all three together, if you were to take all the common things but then add the uncommon things all together, what you find is that you just get more information, and that's it. There's nowhere that you find any contradiction. So interesting. We will go through those. Those are again in chapter 8, and we're going to take a look at what what Mark and Luke also have to say on these, and very, very telling, very interesting stuff. So before we get there, just a couple of very quick things. We are continuing on looking through how we contend in the days in which we live when it comes to the matter of Israel and the modern nation of Israel, and also whether or not the things that God had said to them all the way back in the Old Testament really have any relevance for today, or if they are really kind of just exhausted and done, and really everything that God ever said to the nation of Israel and the people of Israel have actually now been spiritualized and made complete in the church. So we've been looking at that, and we've been taking our time going through it, kind of topic by topic in the big topic of the church, and have we replaced Israel? But there are a lot of little bits and pieces of it that really should be asked and answered, and we should be very familiar with what the actual text has to say all across the board. So I looked last week, and the last 2 weeks rather, the last two studies I should say, at what Galatians has to say, and I want to take a look at what Romans has to say, because here again we have a couple of verses that are pointed to by the replacement theology people as evidences of their belief, and that is that there is no future work that God is doing in the nation of Israel. So everything that is happening there currently is really just nothing more than coincidence, and it really isn't anything biblical, and that there's really nothing going forward in the future as far as they're concerned, because all of it has been now completed in the church. And so we're going through and kind of reading through the verses that they say kind of prove their point, but then we're also giving the counter of those things, and we did that with Galatians. We're going to do that with Romans today. And since I'm talking about Israel, we have a trip that's going there next April, this coming year, 2026, April the 20th. So we are going to have the registration in the first couple of weeks of January, actually on the 9th of January. So as you're hearing me say this, if you're interested in going, please contact me before the 9th, because you'll need to get registration into the travel agency. They have to start making our reservations, and they have to start booking all of those things so that we'll have accommodations even to the airlines. So if you've never had a chance to go to Israel, trust me, if you have the ability to get there, and if you've never seen it with your own eyes, it absolutely revolutionizes the way that you study the scriptures, and being able to be in places that you read about in the text itself. You never quite read the scriptures the exact same way, and you come back just different in your view of these things. So I strongly encourage you, if you've never been, to make the time to go and put aside what you need to in order to go. And so again, it's going to be the 20th of April is our departure date. We are all going to be leaving out of the East Coast, and we're going to be coming back to the East Coast as one group. Just makes it easier to get in and out of the airport in Israel, which helps us also with the transportation back and forth from the hotels and from the airport to the hotels, all that stuff. We're going to travel as a group. So once again, contact me through the ministry's website, which is oldpaththeology.net. We'd love to have you along with us. Again, I keep thinking, the day's going to come because I believe that the world will continue to become more hostile towards the nation of Israel, and they will be left on their own, as the scripture tells us, which means that travel is not always going to be possible there. Right now, currently it is, and we just got back about a month and a half ago, and it was amazing. Well, we were able to get anywhere that we really wanted to go. It was an incredible trip. So we are going to go back in springtime. We'd love to have you with us. So if you want more detail, again, send me an email, and I'll be happy to send the information to you. We'd love to have you along with us. So as far as that's concerned, that is it as far as announcements. And we continue on in the book of Matthew here, chapter 8. Now, I want to point out a couple of things because it becomes kind of easy almost to forget some basic details, basic information about this. Where Matthew is and where he points these things out, it's kind of early in the ministry that Jesus has, and it's in the area around Galilee. Now, this really kind of, what we're looking at now hits its stride, I believe, in chapters 5, 6, and 7 at what we call the Sermon on the Mount. Now, there were things that had already taken place, no question. We've already been through those as we're studying through this chapter and verse. But when you get to the end of chapter 5, or I'm sorry, the end of chapter 7, you notice what it says about the people who had heard him. And their reaction to the things that he said, they were kind of stunned at what he said. And as the passage records for us, they were really kind of stunned at the authority that he spoke with. Not speaking like somebody who's talking about someone else or using someone else's authority, but really that he had it and had it alone. And there were things that he was able to say to them that really no one else, no ordinary person would dare say. So the idea of correcting those who were teachers of the law, when he says that you've heard it said, but I say to you. And he's quoting, going back and putting in original intent as far as the Ten Commandments were concerned and the things that were commanded for them to do. So there's just a number of those kinds of things, and we don't really have to read much into it. All we need to do is take a look at the reaction of the people. And they realized that the things that he was saying put him in a completely different category. They weren't used to it. So there are the people who were watching and listening to it, but remember the other audience that's there, and that being his disciples, and especially the inner circle of the guys. That's what's really important here. So by the time that we reach the passages that we're looking at here in chapter 8, let's remember all that's taken place. They've heard the entirety of the Sermon on the Mount, chapters 5, 6, 7, and the authority that he gives, and the idea of how he teaches them to pray, and the authority that he has, and the way that he approaches prayer in that model and saying, pray like this. It is revolutionary. So once again, who is he to say such a thing and give them direction on how they are supposed to pray? That takes an insane amount of authority. And so what they're hearing is, again, it's without precedent. Now, as they come down from there, from the place where the Sermon on the Mount took place, wherever that may have been, just above Galilee, wherever that was, we got an idea, just kind of the region of it. As they come back, people start to come to him, and he begins to do these miraculous healings, cleanses a leper, heals Peter's mother-in-law, and there were others that were also healed, one remotely, and it says a whole other number of people were healed, and he was casting out demons and doing all the rest of these things. Now again, imagine you're one of the disciples, and you're watching these things. You're an eyewitness to the events, and now this is all beginning to kind of snowball a bit, where you're watching him and you've seen him do all of these things. Now you're about to see in two separate episodes that not only has he been able to speak with authority, He's also able to heal on demand. Whenever he wants to do it, he does that. He's able to heal without any kind of formula. It's just according to the force of his will. What he wants to do, he does. Now, we're going to get to the place where they're going across and the tempest comes up and he's asleep in the back of the boat and they're thinking that they're all going to die, and he calms the storm. Again, they've never seen anything like this. They have seen other incredibly miraculous things, and even this is another step even above all else that they've seen, where they are almost filled with a sense not only of awe but fear, and just kind of not being afraid of him, but just kind of coming to grips with what you've just seen. Then they get to the point where they get across, and this is where the demon-possessed man meets them at the boat. They're about to see him, Jesus, take authority over demonic forces and command them around to the point where they will even recognize him. So imagine being one of the disciples and you're watching these things happen and they roll out. And I think it's good for us to really take into account that that's the case. Why would these men be willing to pay with their lives as they did? And we have record of it, that these people who were his followers, when given the option to just go kind of, if you're really believing a lie and you're just out promoting something that really is not true, are you really willing to die for it? Of course, the answer is no. So they have clearly seen something, not just evidence, but they know what they know. They've been witnesses to what they've been witnesses to, and all of them, to a man, is willing to say, I would rather die for what I've seen and believe than to renounce it and believe otherwise. So these were people who were martyred because of what they believed Jesus told them that they would be. They were persecuted, they were followed after, they were actually ultimately killed. So the importance of this, they are now seeing these things, and it gives them reasons why they should believe. And again, these are their eyewitness accounts of the things that they saw. So in this case, Matthew being one of those eyewitnesses, the other ones that we would get, Mark and Luke, people who were obviously alive at the time, but were not eyewitnesses directly themselves. Mark would have seen some stuff, but who knows how much. He certainly would have had a great resource in the person of Paul and, of course, of Barnabas. But as far as Luke is concerned, again, he's with Paul at a later time, so these are really good sources for their Gospels, and they're complementary anyway. It's not like they've got a whole separate Gospel. So with all that as background, we get to these two events here, and it's really, really good for us to just quietly think about for just a moment, putting yourself in that place. You're seeing these things with your own eyes. So we are getting eyewitness accounts of the events that took place. In Luke's case, he has gone and interviewed all those who were present. Mark had his inputs. Many people believe that it was Peter also who had a great deal of input into what he had to say. But we know that this Mark would have been around with Paul and Barnabas too. So estranged for quite some time from Paul, but ultimately at the end of his ministry, Mark is gathered to him. So really good stuff for us to remember, that these guys have seen some things that absolutely blow their mind. And in succession, the two events that are here and each of the Gospels that follow it, or that chronicle it, show it as being happening in the same chronology, one following the other. So let's turn to chapter 8. Let's have a word of prayer, and we will jump right into this. Father, we thank you so much again for the privilege that we have to sit at your feet and to take in the things that you would show us, that we might learn and understand and know what it is that we believe and why. So we pray that you would, by the work of the Holy Spirit, minister to our hearts and minds, opening the Scriptures to us in our understanding, and we pray that you would be glorified in our lives as we study and learn and grow. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. In chapter 8, we pick up in verse 23. And this is, they're going across. Remember, they are currently in Capernaum. And Capernaum would be that place that is along the west coast, the northern portion of it. And it's kind of his earthly ministry area. There are a number of places of importance that are close by. But the idea that he would go across, we know that Bethsaida would have been one of the places that they would go across. It would be going kind of to the northeast. In this case, he's going across to an area that we know as En-Gev. There's in the area also a church known as Kursi, and the ruins of a church, I should say. But really on that side of the Galilee, there's not a lot of stuff. It's right at the foot of the Golan Heights. And when you're looking across, you basically just see the hills, what we call, again, the Golan Heights. And there's not a lot over there. There's a lot of agriculture, but there's not a lot in the way of towns. Now, when you get over to the west coast, you have Tiberias. And Tiberias, when you're on the east coast, you can look across the Sea of Galilee and you see Tiberias. You can't miss it. There's nothing like it in its equivalence on the other side, but it's pretty easy for us to tell kind of where this is. There's really not a lot of I guess you could say, debate about where this place is that they would have been going to. But it's pretty much just across the Sea of Galilee on the east coast, and there is a place there known again as En-Gev, and we travel there. We see it with our own eyes when we're there in Israel. Now, interesting, one of our trips back in 2018, we stayed in En-Gev at a kibbutz there, and just call it a hotel. I won't explain what kibbutzes are. You can look it up online, what a kibbutz is. Let's just say the hotel. So the night that we got there, this is just really interesting because of what we were going to do the following day was to go through and retrace these things. So we get there and my hotel room doesn't have the air conditioning working at the time. So I called the front desk, told them what was going on. They said they looked at it. It wasn't something that they could correct right away. It wasn't crazy hot. It was just a little bit humid. So that's fine. I just sleep with the windows open. No big deal. So middle of the night, I'm woken up by something that is touching my face. And so I'm thinking it's a big fly or whatever it was, but it was enough to wake me out of a sleep. What it turns out, it was the curtains, the kind of shears that were hitting me in the face. Now, it was calm when I went to sleep, but the wind picked up like crazy, so much that it was blowing these things into my face. And as I wake up, I'm starting to see the room light up. And so obviously there's a storm taking place. And so the winds have picked up. We're starting to get some lightning, and it's moving from west to east, and it's coming across the Sea of Galilee. I get up because I have to take a look at this. Of course, I'm thinking what is going to be going on the next day. I'm going to be reading this text the next day. I knew this. So I get up and I walk out onto the just outside the door, and it's pouring rain. And the winds are just howling and blowing like crazy, and it happens. But by the time the morning comes around, it's all past. The skies are nice and sunny, and it was beautiful. There was still wet on the ground and everything else, but it was just really, really amazing. What it told me is that these storms can kind of come up out of nowhere, and they can be incredibly intense. Now, if you've ever been out on water, you will know that if it's a strong enough storm, it will chop up the water really, really bad. And with enough rain and a very bad kind of a storm, it could be a very perilous thing. Now, let's remember, these are not a bunch of tourists. The men who are out on this boat are men who are used to being out on the water. This is not an unusual thing. And remember that at this point, Jesus is already having said he wanted to go across. But the problem was that people were still there, and they were kind of pressing in on him, and he was ministering to their needs. So he does all of those things, and now it's time that they can actually get in the boat and they can go across. And that's where we pick up in the text today. Now, we're going to look at the parallels on this because they're really interesting to read. What we have in Matthew is pretty common, and it's pretty straightforward. It's kind of doesn't have a lot of detail, not what we get in the other ones. And so let's just read verse 23. It says, "Now, when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him, and suddenly a great tempest arose on the sea, so that the boat was covered with waves. But he was asleep. And then his disciples came to him and awoke him, saying, 'Lord, save us, we are perishing.' But he said to them, 'Why are you fearful, O you of little faith?' And then he arose, rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was great calm. So the men marveled, saying, who can this be that even the winds and the sea obey him? Now, it's again a great question, but you would be able to say, who is this man? Well, isn't he the same one who's just done a bunch of incredible healings and spoke with a kind of authority that only God can really speak? They've heard that on the Sermon on the Mount. They've seen the miraculous things. They've seen him cast out demons. All that stuff happened right before they got onto the boat. So this is a case where he's shown his authority over the physical body and even the demonic forces that are there. So he's seen those things, they've seen those things take place. We don't get a lot of detail about the other kinds of healings, aside from Peter's mother, the centurion's, Peter's stepmother, the centurion's servant, the leprous man. It says, but there were all manner of people having sicknesses and demons, and he handled all of that stuff. We just don't get any details. It just tells us as there were a lot of things that took place. So here we have these men who are accustomed to being out on the water, but this one has them troubled, more so than anything else. And it says, all that he had to say was, calm, be still. And so he takes what is a tempest that's bad enough, a storm, whatever you want to call it, it's of enough of a magnitude and it's bad enough that it has these people who are seasoned at being out on the water, fearful for their own lives, and he's able to stop this storm that had them in fear for their lives like it's nothing. Now, there's one of those questions that always pops up. If you're thinking about it in your mind, what would happen if Jesus said, "Calm, be still"? Does that mean that the wind stops blowing, that the water calms down, whatever else is happening, it all just kind of subsides? It can mean that. I happen to be one who believes that everything comes to an abrupt stop instantaneously. Whether it's rain, wind, the sea being tossed around, I think it goes from being complete chaos to absolute calm and like it's the quietest day that they've ever seen. And I believe that happens in an instant. And why do I believe that? Well, partially because of their reaction. But if you're going to make a demonstration, and if you're God who's going to calm something and you're going to have that kind of authority and you have the ability to do it, make it where there's no question. So I don't have any doubt in my mind that it went from being the ultimate of chaos to the ultimate of calm instantaneously. To me, there's really no doubt. There's no reason why he would do anything less. And so their reaction is pretty interesting. It's pretty telling. They are just kind of fearful, and they have to ask amongst themselves, who is he that even the creation itself has to obey him? Interestingly enough, it's John who was on the boat, doesn't give us this account in his, but he does tell us a bit about who Jesus is in his gospel. In the first chapter, in the first few verses, it tells us that through Jesus, the worlds were created. So it's really no big deal looking at it in hindsight that the creator of everything that man is able to see, where he takes absolutely nothing and creates a universe in which we live, that he can do that himself, then actually taking the authority over that creation is no big deal. It's easy for us to say that in 2,000 years after the events. If you're there in real time, it's going to be pretty impressive to the senses. And I guarantee you that if we were all in that same place, right here, right now, if you went on a trip to Israel with me, and we were out on the Sea of Galilee, and one of these kind of things happened, and Jesus showed up and did all that stuff, we wouldn't just look at that and go, yeah, well, he's done it before, no big deal. We would all be in awe, even though we know what we know. So let's make sure we genuinely understand. We're not used to seeing that kind of mastery over the physical world. And they've seen it with their own eyes in a number of different ways. This time they actually see it in the actual calming of the storm. Now, let's take a look at the other, excuse me, the other accounts, and they add some interesting little details. So we get this in Mark chapter 4, and that picks up at verse 36, I believe, 35. So let's look at verse 35, and it runs through the end of the chapter, and look at what he has. There's a little bit of additional information we get here. So it says, now on the same day when evening had come, he said to them, let us cross over to the other side. And so when they had left the multitude, they took him along in the boat as he was, as he was, and the other little boats were also with him. So there were a number of boats that went, smaller ones than the one that he was in. So we get this idea that there are a number of them going across. So it says, and a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that it was already filling. So it gives the impression in Matthew that no sooner do they get in the boat than the whole thing happens. This gives the impression that a little bit of time lapses. Doesn't tell us how much. It's enough that they're far enough offshore that they're concerned about it. It's not like they've just gotten offshore, because then why do you worry about it? Just turn the boat around or swim if you have to. In this case, they have to be out a little bit of a ways. So it tells us, but he was in the stern asleep on the pillow. That tells you it has been at least some amount of time, because he wasn't asleep when he got on the boat. So it tells us, they awoke him, and they said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? And then he arose, and he rebuked the wind, and he said to the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. Now, I'm going to do something real quick here. I'm going to bring up a picture because I think it's really interesting. And I'm going to show you what the Sea of Galilee can look like in good weather, because I've never been out on the Sea of Galilee when it's really, really rough. I've been out there when there's a little bit of disturbance, but nothing like this. What we're used to seeing is what you're seeing in the picture that I'm about to put up. So let me bring that up now. So what you're looking at is a picture of the Sea of Galilee, and it's as calm can get, and it's pretty amazing what you're seeing there, because this is about as still as it can possibly be. And what you're looking at as we're headed in that direction, we are headed towards the area where the next of these things happens. So from all appearances, it wasn't daylight when this was taking place. It seems like it was kind of a through the night kind of a thing, because he's sleeping. But anyhow, when it took place and what time of day it took place is really not the issue. What ends up happening while they're out on the water is the big deal. So what you're looking at as we're headed that way, we're headed towards the east coast of the Sea of Galilee, and we're on our way towards En-Gedi. This is where I would have been staying the night that this happened. As I was sleeping, this is where that all took place. You can kind of see it as we're heading that direction. So let me bring that picture down, and we'll get back to the text. So we read on in verse 38. It says that Jesus was in the stern, asleep on a pillow, and they awoke him, and they said, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Then he arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. But he said, Why is it that you are fearful, and how is it that you have no faith? And they feared exceedingly, and they said to one another, Who can this be that even the wind and the sea obey him? So there is, again, more information. Why are you filled with fear, and why is it that you're in a place of unbelief? Now, there are a lot of speculations about this and what did he mean by it, and a lot of places where you can have applications to it, and people will preach sermons on this about, can't you trust God even in the storms and all the rest of it? And I'm not one of those who really likes to approach the scripture that way and sermonizing everything. But what I do find interesting in this, and by implication, Jesus knew why he was here. So if they die, he dies. In this case, in the human sense, can Jesus actually die? Of course he can. He did at the cross. The human physical nature of him, of who he is, that mortal body is absolutely subject to what every other mortal body is. So his point would be to them, and it should be obvious, is that if I'm not concerned about this, it's because this isn't something that is going to be to our detriment. Now, did he let it go far enough that it really kind of put them to the test? It certainly seems that way. Now, was that deliberate, or was it just, how was it? Why was he sleeping? Was he really sleeping? The scripture tells us he was asleep, so I have no reason to believe he was anything other than asleep. But again, the implication to this, Jesus would be able to look at them, though this is not what's said here. I think it's just kind of more of an implication. I'm able to sleep through this because I'm not in fear for my life. And again, that's because God has work for us to do. And if for somehow I'm going to perish, or if you guys are going to perish, I'm going to have to go down with you. And that's not what we're doing here. So there's a lot of interesting intrigue, I guess you could say, to this. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at Luke's version of this, because it's also quite interesting. Chapter 8 is where we get that, and it picks up at verse 22. So, in verse 22, we get this. Now, it happened on a certain day. So, it doesn't make it sound like the other Gospels where they were Mount of Beatitudes, came down to Capernaum, and then after Capernaum, during that same episode of things, that same series of events, that they wanted to move across the other way after Jesus did the things that he did, having already expressed a desire to go across to the other side. So here, it just says on a particular day, doesn't give any details. And then he said to them, let us cross over to the other side of the lake, and they launched out. But as they sailed, he fell asleep. That tells us that as they were on the road, or on the water, and again, we're in motorized boats, and it still takes us a while to get across. They're actually having to sail, they're having to do whatever they can with the boats, or using paddles, whatever it may be, if there's no wind. It's not something that's going to happen quickly. So Jesus falls asleep during the process. So as they sailed, he fell asleep, and the windstorm came down on the lake. A windstorm came down on the lake, and they were filling with water and were in jeopardy. So it's not that they've overblown this. They do what they know what to do, and nonetheless, they're in the place of real peril. They realize this is not some small thing, and they're not just being dramatic. When they wake him, these are men who know exactly what they're doing, and they are in a place of actual fear. So it tells us in verse 24, and so they came to him and they awoke him and they said, Master, we are perishing. And then he arose and he rebuked the wind and the raging of the water, and they ceased, and there was a great calm. But he said to them, where is your faith? So nothing about being fearful, just where is it? Where do you believe? Now, there are some who speculate, is this something that they shouldn't have been able to take to the Lord themselves? Could they not have prayed? Could they not have done something about it themselves? I don't tend to side with that. I think it's more looking at them and saying, why are you afraid? You know that I have things that I'm going to do. Why are you fearful? Or why is it that you have no faith? You've heard what I've had to say. You know this can't be the end of it if I have other things to do. So there's also some implied stuff with this as well. What we know that they have come to learn from him since becoming his disciples, we have only a glimpse, a fraction of all the things that he would have ever had said to them to this point, and there was still so much more. So why would they have something in whom and in which to put their faith? He's probably given them more than ample reason above just the miracles, but that there's more going on here. There's no way that they're all going to perish while they're going across on the boat if they really see the big picture. But here they're just caught up in circumstance, and again, lots of sermon applications to that, being so locked in on the here and now that you're not seeing the big picture. Well, his point is, you guys aren't seeing the big picture. This can't take us all out. There are still things to do. Anyhow, he asks them, and he ends up asking this, and all three of the Gospels record it. When he asks a question, it is intended for accountability. When he throws out something like that, it's for them to have to answer the question. Now, whether they answer it verbally or they have to work it through in their own mind, in the same case, he does this. They were afraid, they marveled, saying to one another, who is this, or who can this be? For he commands even the winds and water, and they obey him. So this actually, even the way that it's worded, is a really interesting thing, is their recognition of the physical world has to show obedience to him. Now, this brings them to the other side. They make their way over to Engev, which is, as we're going to see, all of them agree on this as well. All three of the Gospels, and they pick it up at the exact same place. So let's go back to Matthew chapter 8, and we pick up what happens here when he casts out the demons from the people who are there. Now, Matthew is the only one that tells us that when they get there that there are two, and both Luke and Mark mention one. The important part is that with Mark and Luke, they're not concerning themselves with the other one because the interaction isn't with the one of two men that Matthew tells us two men met them there. One of them becomes the focus of the attention. What happened to the other one? We don't know. We're not given detail. But what we get in this from Matthew's, let's read it. When he had come to the other side, to the country of the Gergesenes, which is another way of saying the Gadarenes, and this is the area or the region known as Gadara. And there are some that would say it's just kind of coincidental, but this would have been in the general area when the tribes of Israel began to populate the land. There were three of the tribes, well, 2.5 of the tribes that had said when they were settling the land with Joshua, we want to stay on the other side of the Jordan. In modern day, what is Jordan and up into Syria. We want to stay in this area. We don't want to go again on the other side of the Jordan. Now that would have been half of the tribe of Manasseh that would have taken the northernmost portion of this land on the other side of the Galilee and on the other side of the Jordan. And just below them would be the tribe of Gad. And Gad's property line ran right along the Jordan River, a very tiny sliver that went all the way up to the Sea of Galilee, right at the southern tip of it. And East Manasseh would be here, Gad would be here in this area, and then down below that would be Reuben. So those were the 2.5 tribes. The other part of Manasseh settled further over into the west. And so the tribal allotment was kind of split at that time. So some look at this and say, well, the Gadarenes take their name from Gad, the tribe that had settled there. Others say, no, that's just kind of coincidental, and they'll give you all the details on it. And you can read about it. It's really not that interesting how it came to be. But this would just be the area that would have been known as what we would consider today, En-Gev or Kursi, that area, what would be known as the Girgashites or the Gadarenes. So whatever it is, doesn't much matter what they are, is now on the east coast of the Sea of Galilee, and they come to shore. So what ends up happening in verse 28, suddenly they cried out, when they had come over to the other side, let's go back to verse 28, there met him 2 demon-possessed men. So not just one, but 2. Coming out of the tombs, exceedingly fierce, so that no one could pass by the way. Now, what we're not told is all of the people who are here, mixture of Jew and Gentile. We don't know exactly what the composition is. But a Jewish person would not live among the catacombs. They would not live in a place where people are buried. That was just a thing for Jews. You don't walk over graves. That's why you'll notice that the graves in Israel are above ground. So you don't walk over the top of them. They are above ground. So that's the first thing here that's very unkosher, if you will, of this man living among the tombs, among the dead. So suddenly they, the 2 of them, cried out, saying, what have you to do with us, Jesus, you Son of God? Now, that's an interesting, important matter, because this is the attribution of him as being the Son of God. Interestingly enough, we just finished up, as we're doing this, I didn't put this up yesterday. Yesterday was the observance of Christmas, the 25th of December. Here today is the 26th. Now, being Christmas, a lot of times you will hear, because there's Christmas carols and all the rest, that Jesus is the son of Mary. Well, Mary is just the person who gave birth, but she's not the mother of God. She is the mother of Jesus, the human being, but as far as what Jesus would refer to as being Father, it's heavenly. And so in this case, he is the Son of God, in the sense of deity, and not looking to his earthly mother. May seem like a pretty unusual or unnecessary distinction. Well, there are people who think very seriously that Jesus is the son of Mary, or that Mary is the mother of God. It's good to keep things in their proper perspective. Here, the demons recognize, they make no mention of Mary. It's really that he is the Son of God, not Joseph, not Mary. They recognize him in his deity authority. And so they said to him, have you come here to torment us before the time? The time. We're going to get to that when we look through the other Gospels too. But they recognize that there is something that is future to their time, and they see that this is out of the sequence. But notice here, they look at him as having the ability and the authority to do so. So where the demon-possessed people that he cast out demons on the other side, we don't get any of those details. These ones here address him directly and recognize that he has the authority over them to do as he wills to them, and they realize that there is something future that's going to happen to them, and they know what it is. There's theological stuff behind this that's mind-blowing, because here the demons and the devil will do all the stuff that they do, but they know the end of it. So it's not like there's uncertainty. They're just doing what they do because it's harmful to mankind, and that's their way of getting back at God between here and there. But I want to focus in on the importance of this. These demons, as soon as they lay eyes on him, they recognize him as having the ability and the authority to do with them as he wills. Let that sink in for a moment, and imagine again you being one of his disciples listening to this. And the sidebar to that would be, we just watched all of creation obeying him in the storm, and now we hear demons talking to him directly as though he is one who has authority over them and can do with them as he wills. Imagine being one of those guys and taking all of this in. And you're hearing some pretty amazing things. And so here's this back and forth, this dialogue that takes place. Now, it tells us a good way off from them, there was a herd of many swine who were feeding. Now, this is the other unclean thing, that Jews living among pigs, swine. But let's remember, this is also a place that has a lot of Gentile influence, because all the way back to the time when the Assyrians came through, the north has been wiped out and has been for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, beginning with the Assyrians and then through the times of the not only the Babylonians or the Assyrians, but then the Babylonians, then the Persians, then the Greeks, now the Romans. So always this part of the country, and really all of Israel, since the time of Solomon, from the Babylonians onward, had always been somebody else controls them. They've always had to answer to someone else. So the idea that there would be non-Jewish people living among them and having all kinds of non-Jewish things, that a pig was an unclean animal. It wouldn't have been being raised for livestock of any kind or for any reason. Again, let's remember, other than for eating them, pigs really don't serve a purpose. They're very destructive if you know what they're about. So they're clearly being raised for just some pretty obvious reasons, to either be sacrificed or to be eaten, or both. So with that being said, they say, here in verse 31, so the demons begged him, saying, if you cast us out, permit us to go away into that herd of swine. And he said to them, go. So they realize they need his permission, and so they allow themselves, or they ask to be sent over, and he allows them to go. Now, this is not supposed to be a question of demonology. It's not one of those kind of things that we really spend a whole lot of time, because the scripture doesn't give us information. So I can't help myself. The obvious question arises, okay, we understand that demons could possess people, but would they be able to possess animals? Well, clearly we have this here, and I always like to joke, if you've never met my cats, there should be no questions that animals can be demon possessed. So it's just such an easy joke to make. Most of the time my cats are pretty awesome, but not always. So he said to them, go. And so that when they had come out, they went into the herd of swine, and suddenly the whole herd of swine ran violently down the steep place into the sea, and they perished in the water. Now, again, this is because we have this image in our mind, because we've probably heard it said so many times, we kind of think that there's just some sheer cliff and that they all run off to it. It just tells us it's a steep place. So when you get there, it's exactly that. And it's not just a cliff that they fall out into the water, because there are places right above where we were staying and where we go and look, and you can look up onto the hillside, and to this day you can still see where these caves are. And in that whole area, there's not a lot of those kinds of places. But you can see where they would be up there, and where he could have been living among the tombs and the caves that were there. That's not a problem. Just below them would have been places where you could have had livestock, but you can run down into the Galilee very, very easily from there, and there are steeper areas. Now again, let's remember, that there's a lot that happens with erosion through times, and the Sea of Galilee wouldn't have been incredibly higher level. It wouldn't have been up at the level where all the caves and everything are, because they're quite a ways above sea level of the Sea of Galilee anyway. And if you were going to bring the water level up to where those caves are, you would be absolutely putting Capernaum and a number of other places around Galilee completely underwater. So they went running down this embankment or the steep place out into the water, and they all died. So again, there's so many questions that come up about this, that why were they allowed to go into those? If they were going to die right away, then what happened to them and where did they go? We know that that when the pigs died, they didn't die, because they're not, obviously they're demons. They're going to live in an eternal sense, and the lake of fire is where they're going to go. And they realize that's their torment that's being spoken of here. So a lot of unanswered questions. What we simply know is this: they were not permitted to stay in this man, and he's the only one that we're told gets the demons cast out of him, because that's the one that they're speaking through, these demons. Did it cover both men? We don't have any information about that. The other man is really silent in this whole thing. What we do know is this man has all of the demons cast out of him, and they go into the swine. Instantly the swine react. The pigs, they go running out into the water, and they all die. They drown. So again, this is, I know, obligatory silly jokes. If you still buy into the idea that they jumped off a cliff, this is when pigs fly, or we can call this deviled ham. So there's your obligatory jokes. You can go ahead and chuckle about that. Verse 33. Then those who kept them, the ones who kept them, they fled, and they went away into the city, and they told everything, including what had happened to the demon-possessed men. And behold, the whole city came out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they begged him to depart from their region. And that's all that we get from Matthew. It's pretty straightforward, but he's the only one who mentions that there are initially two men. The only one that gets focused on is this one particular man, and what we find is that the people who owned the swine and who lived around the area, whatever it was, they were witnesses to all this. They went looking to the authorities. They needed to tell them what was going on. They wanted more people involved in the process. Now, with that, let's take a look at what Luke has to say, or Mark rather. Mark has this in chapter 5. Mark 5. And I prefer Mark and Luke's rendition of this because of the detail that's given. Not that it's better than theirs, but than Matthew's, but it gives detail that is lacking in Matthew's. But Matthew's the one that provides and says there were two men, and the focus only becomes one of those two men. But we get some details in Mark and Luke that are different from the other ones. Now, a lot of reading here. Chapter 5, verse 1. So they came to the other side of the sea, to the country that is known as the country of the Gadarenes. Now this is Gergesenes was the other side. Gergesia, Gergesenes, Gadarenes, all the same thing. It's just a different way of saying all the same things. It's whether you're talking about the region or the people or the city or whatever it may be. They're all speaking of the same thing. Now, when they had come out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. So only one of them is in focus here, and only one of them addresses Jesus in Matthew that we're told about, from the two to the one. So here it only focuses on the individual. So it says, now, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one could bind him, not even with chains, because he often had been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken into pieces. Neither could anyone tame him. So we're getting a lot of detail here that's not given to us in Matthew. Always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying out and cutting himself with stones. So that tells us that this is up away from where the water is, away from everything else. They just notice, for some reason, he usually is up above in the little canyon area. Again, what we see, where the tombs are, where the caves are and all that stuff, it's a little bit of an elevated area, but you certainly see everything, and the boat would have come over. Somehow, some way, they're alerted to it. These two men, one comes down. So, or they both come down, but one is in focus here. Now, verse 6. So when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and he worshipped him. Now let's remember, worship here is not that he wanted anything to do with him in the way of worship like we do. This is simply a recognition that he sees Jesus as the superior. This would be that idea of that you're beholden to him. It's that bowing before him. It's that recognition that you are looking at someone superior to yourself. We, in the same sense, our worship is the same thing. We see Jesus as the one who is worthy of our subjection. We would gladly bow the knee and put our face to the ground if that's the case, out of reverence and love and honor of him. In this case, it's just a recognition, though this demon hates him, he still has to recognize who he is. So this is that idea of just kind of prostrate, eyes to the ground, bowing before him. That's the recognition. So the worship is not one of adoration. The worship here is the one of understanding just who it is that you're standing before. So he's, you could say, kind of face down, that worshiping, however you want to try to, reckon it. It is him seeing Jesus and paying him due honor and due respect. So it says, he cried out with a loud voice. He said, "What have you to do, Jesus, with us, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" So even more description, more of a title in the Old Testament sense, the El Elyon, the God Most High, the Almighty. He recognizes him. You're the Son of the Almighty. "I implore you by God that you do not torment me." And he said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And then he asked him, kind of at the same time, "What is your name?" And he answered to him, said, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Now, legion is just a term of, in a military sense, of a particular number of people. And depending on which group you're looking at, depending on who is the military at the time, if this is Roman, it's over 6,000 men that would be in a legion. So what this is not supposed to do is to give us an exact number. It's a way of just basically saying we're a multitude. There's not some number that you're going to put on it. It's just this man is he's possessed by a multitude, a legion of demons, but one is speaking for them. So answered Legion, "We are many." Also, he begged him earnestly that he would not send them out of the country, not to be put away at a separate time. Remember the idea of torment before the time. All of these things are basically being said the same way. It's the recognition that don't send us away from here. Now, why do they care about that? What's their reasoning behind it? We're not told, but they're just, not wanting to have their situation change. Now, here's the interesting thing, and I mentioned it when we were looking at Matthew's version. The pigs that they went into died. What happened to them? We are not told. Interestingly enough, we do know that when a person, from what Jesus teaches, that if a person is cleaned of demons, and that person does not have God actually governing them, those demons come back with ones worse than them, 7 worse than they are. So interestingly enough, it's not as though that they died when the pigs died. They went somewhere. We're just not told where. We're not told what happened to them. Interesting that they were concerned about being put away where they didn't have free reign that they currently do. So it says, "Now a large herd of swine was feeding there near the mountains, and so all the demons begged, and they said, 'Send us to the swine that we may enter them.'" Now there's a lot of different opinions about why the pigs, why was that an important thing, why would they ask to be moved there, all that kind of stuff. And again, I don't know that there's a really good reason why we can have any of this. Again, is it just put there to show the kind of I guess you could say degradation of the land and the place where pigs shouldn't even be? It's in the tribal allotment of the children of Israel. One of these things shouldn't even be existing, but it tells you how bad things had become. Again, it's not about demonology. It's not about, what can they inhabit. It's not supposed to be given for all of those reasons. It just tells us the facts. Here's what happened. They're looking for anywhere. Send us over there. Okay, I'll send you there. He consents to it. He allows it to take place. So all the demons begged him, saying, "Send us to the swine that we may enter them." And at once Jesus gave them permission. Once again, him not only addressing them, not only them recognizing him as his deity, but they had to have his permission to do anything. Picture yourself as being one of the disciples and having to wrap your mind around this. So he gave them permission, and then the unclean spirits went out and they entered the swine, and there were about 2,000. That's the only detail that, the only of the three that gives us that detail. So that's quite a herd. And it says, and the herd ran violently down the steep place into the sea, and they drowned in the sea. So those who fed the swine fled, and they told it to the city and to the country, and they went out to see what it was that had happened. And then they came to Jesus. They saw the one who had been demon possessed, and who had legion, sitting and clothed and in his right mind. Sitting, not running around, not anything else. And it says also clothed, where it said he had been naked, and in his right mind, which is he was anything but those things. So everything that they knew about him, that he would just run violently from place to place, that he was never, clothed, and that he was certainly not in his right mind. Everything that he was is now changed. And yet they've heard the report of this, and this is what they see. So it says, then they began to plead with him and asking him to depart from their region. And when he got into the boat, he who had been demon possessed begged him that he might be with him. This man wanted to go with him. Now, let this sink in, because again, it's very sermon worthy, that the people who have the deepest need at this point, the guy who was demon possessed is out of need. He's now been cleansed of the whole thing, and he is wanting to be where Jesus is. I have no doubt, though we're not told in the Gospels, there's a whole lot more that went in on this, and that this man would have been very devoted to him. So this man's life changed revolutionary overnight. We know that this really had some staying power because of his testimony that happens from this. But isn't this interesting? And this is our world today. The people with some of the greatest needs are the ones who want Jesus everywhere else but in front of them. So the same thing here. They ask him, and again, he's not going to impose himself. They are able to choose for themselves. And the only person who wants to be with him, other than his disciples that came with him, of that whole region, of everybody that's there, the only one that's mentioned as wanting to be where he is the man who was saved. There's so much sermon-worthy information in that, it's obvious. So it tells us, in verse 19, that Jesus did not permit him to go. But he said to him, go home to your friends and tell them the great things that the Lord, kurios. So this is when you see Lord, this is the idea of master. Let them know what the Lord, the master, has done for you. So he says, go tell everybody. You're a great testimony. You go tell them what's been done. Now again, if he's not somebody who cared about such things, and he just was happy to be no longer demon-possessed and wasn't going to be a follower of the Lord, he wouldn't have done any of these things. So here's what Jesus tells him to do. And I'm sure that Jesus says, I'd love for you to come with me, but I'd rather you be a witness here on this part, because they're not in this area. Jesus and the disciples are not in this area, but he is. And he's going to go further towards the west, or towards the east rather, and he's going to all the areas of what's known as Decapolis. Decapolis were the cities that the Romans had set up in modern-day Syria. One of them is in modern-day Israel. It's one of the places that we see, known as Bet Shean. Anyway, it says, go and tell them all the things that the Lord, kurios, has done for you, and how he has had compassion on you. And so this man departed, and he began to proclaim in Decapolis all the things that Jesus had done for him. Interesting, where it says, hey, wait a minute. Jesus said, go tell them what the Lord has done. Kurios, the master of all things, the sovereign. And here he goes back and says, here's what Jesus did. Does that mean that he didn't get the story straight, or is he equating Jesus with Lord, kurios? Obviously. So, wanted people to know that what Jesus did is the same as what Jesus told him to say what the Lord has done. So if the Lord has done it, Jesus has done it, same person, and same authority, same everything. So, and the people then marveled. Now, what we get from Luke, again, it's in chapter 8. Let's turn there. And here's the detail that we get from Luke 8. It's also fascinating. There's some pretty cool stuff here, and one really, really big thing that's here. And this is in verse 26. So let's go ahead and read this. And it says to us in verse 26, then they sailed to the country of the Gadarenes, which is opposite Galilee. And when he stepped out of the boat, there met him a certain man. So once again, we're back to the singular and not the two that Matthew talks about, again, because they're going to focus on the one. So, from the city who had demons for a long time, and the demons for a long time had, he wore no clothes. This is how we see that when they saw him, they were surprised, because now this man's no longer naked. Nor did he live in the houses, but he lived in the tombs. And when he saw Jesus, he cried out, fell down before him, that idea of worship, the prostrating of oneself face to the ground kind of a thing, and said, what have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me. And that tormenting means, again, he recognizes Jesus has the authority to do to him what he wills, to them, the demons, what he wills. Now notice, for he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man, for it had often seized him, and he was kept under guard and bound with chains and shackles, and he broke the bonds, and he was driven by the demon into the wilderness. And then Jesus asked him, saying, what is your name? And he said, Legion, because the demons who had entered him. And he begged, these demons, they begged him that he would not command them, or that he would not command them rather, to go into the abyss. This is the Greek word abuso, used in 9 different places. And the important part of this is that of those places, you have it here, where he's speaking about the abyss. There's one usage of it, and it's found in Romans chapter 10, and it's where Paul uses it as the pit. It's just a way of saying the place of death. All the rest of it, all the rest of the usages of the abuso is found in the book of Revelation, and it is the place where the demons are held, the bottomless pit, the abuso. So the references that are made to the abyss in the book of Revelation is where these guys would be. So ultimately, they're going to be put there, and they're reserved for a time until they are released during the time of the tribulation. So when Paul uses it, he's the only one who uses it in Romans 10 as just being kind of a general term speaking about the pit, or the place of death, where dead people are. It's not the place where demons were. It's just a way of saying, you could say it, sometimes it's Sheol, sometimes it's hell, the grave. He uses it as just saying the pit or the abyss. So the abyss that's spoken of here and the one that's in Revelation is speaking about a very specific place where the demons are held until they are released to do the things that they do, as we read in Revelation. You can do a word study on it. You'll see abyss in the text. So it says, now a herd of many swine was feeding there on the mountain, and so they begged him that he should permit them to enter, and so he permitted them. And the demons went out of the man, and they entered the swine, and the herd ran violently down the steep place into the lake, and they drowned. And when those who fed them saw it, and saw what had happened, they fled, and they told it to the city and to the country. This is very consistent with Mark. And it says, and then they went out to see what had happened, and came to Jesus, and found the man from whom the demons had departed sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed in his right mind, and they were afraid. They were troubled by what they saw. We've shackled this guy. We've put him in chains. We've done this stuff. Nobody can tame him, and here he is, this same man just recently that everybody saw crazy, sitting there at Jesus' feet, which is a recognition that he's there to hear what's being said. We hear that Martha and Mary in particular, at Jesus' feet, and at times when he would be speaking, ministering to them. This is the same kind of thing. This is a man who's been cleaned of his demons, and Jesus isn't going to say, all right, great, you're cleansed, and he moves on to the next thing. He spends the time with this man, and this man is sitting there in his right mind at the feet of Jesus being instructed. I would love to know what exactly was being said here. I'm sure that it would be staggering and amazing what he would be saying. Now, they also who had seen it, told them by what means he had been demon possessed was healed. And then the whole multitude of the surrounding region of the Gadarenes, they asked him. Again, here is Jesus who commands demons to leave a man. And these very same people who will make a demand of him to leave, he will do that, because he's not going to impose himself. If you don't want me here, I won't be here. But this man needed me, and so he met that need, and this man becomes quite amazing in his ministry. So it says, so the whole multitude of the surrounding region, they asked him to depart from them, and they were seized with great fear, and he got into the boat and he returned. Now the man from whom the demons had departed begged him that he might go with him, but Jesus said to him, sent him away, saying, return to your own house and tell the great things that God has done. Now this is theos. This is not kurios. This is theos. This is God that's being spoken of here. So it's God Almighty, the master of all things, Jesus. He's the one that when this man goes and testifies the things that Jesus has done for him. Jesus says, tell him, and again, your Lord and your God, if you put all the pieces together, what Jesus would have said to this man, I want to go with you. Jesus looks at him and says, you tell the people what your Lord and God has done for you. And he goes and tells the people, Jesus healed me. Lord and God, Jesus is the healer. So he says, he went away and he proclaimed throughout the whole city the great things that Jesus had done for him. And so it was when Jesus returned, the multitude welcomed him, for they all were waiting for him. And we'll pick up that we'll pick up there next week. But when he gets back to Capernaum, but they go back to where it was, they were ready to receive him in. He was welcomed by them. That's the detail that we only get through Luke. So they're waiting for him, and he's about to do some miraculous things there as well. So again, this is where I hope you don't mind me taking the time to go through this. We could read just Matthew and really start to move through it very quickly. But these parallel passages, when we look through the other Gospels and we see the care with which Jesus handles this and the detail that is put in there for us, that it's easy to read past, but we compare them all together, we get such a richer, complete breakdown of all the details. It really, I believe, is pretty much worth the time to look through these and do the comparison, because it, to me, it's so endearing that we recognize this Jesus that we call upon, and sometimes even at the point where we can sometimes, I think, even maybe lose sight of just how incredible it is that the God who created all things desires that kind of intimacy with his creation that he loves. And so seeing it here played out in somebody 2,000 years ago, it's worth the time to look into. Now, I want to take a look very quickly at the book of Romans, and I want to pick up where we have been working through in looking at Israel and modern day. So what we've done this far, we've done a number of studies, and you're going to be able to look at them all in succession. They're done over a series of studies that we've been doing, but I didn't want to do it as one big volume. I want to do it piece by piece so that we can become familiar with the way to reason through this. We looked over the last two times we gathered together in Galatians, looking at the verse that people love to point to, that only those that are of faith are the children of Abraham, from the end of Galatians. But reading the whole of Galatians, we find out that just reading one verse does not really help in our understanding of the whole of what's there. We have a very similar situation here, because one of the other places that the people that we would call replacement theology get their detail is from the book of Romans. And so turn with me, if you will, then to the book of Romans, and we're going to start at chapter 2, and this is one of their favorite places to go and look. And in Romans chapter 2, we're going to look at verse 28 and 29, verses 28 and 29. And so his point is, there is the idea of ethnic Israel and spiritual, the people within the nation. And again, remember at the time that Paul's there, the nation of Israel has not ceased to exist. It's still in place at the time. So his point is, it's not looking at the land. It's not looking at anything about the nation of Israel. It's not looking at anything else. It's looking at the spiritual side of things. So his point is that in times past, the people could walk with God based upon the things that they did, being obedient to the law and all the rest. Well, Jesus comes into the picture, and they're still in that place of doing those things that are in keeping with the law and what God requires of them. Now, Paul makes this case in Galatians and other places too, that the keeping of the law, since Jesus has come along, really doesn't help in the matter of salvation. There's only one way for a person to be saved, whether Jew or Gentile, and that's going to come through the person of Jesus Christ. So notice here, Paul is dealing all with the spiritual stuff. He's not dealing with the genealogy. He's not dealing with the land allotment. He's not dealing with any of those things, because those are separate promises going back to our early weeks in this series. There is the promise of a spiritual blessing that's going to come through Abraham. That's found in Genesis chapter 12. But by the time we get to Genesis 15 and 17, those two chapters begin to talk about a genealogy that will be where the nation will come through him, and Isaac in particular, and it's going to involve the land allotment. So what the problem is with replacement theology, they leap right over that idea that there is a land allotment in the promise, and they lock it all up as one thing. Every promise made to Israel is really fulfilled in the church, so it nullifies whatever he said to Israel because of their unbelief. Well, interestingly enough, God promises a spiritual blessing to the nations, plural, chapter 12 of Genesis, but then he says, through your generations, there is going to be a blessing of the people and the land, and that's something that's there. Now, the church has never promised land. That promise never even comes into the equation. So there is something that is entirely different. Paul never ever makes the case that the church somehow takes on everything that was ever said to Israel and there it's somehow fulfilled, because those land promises were everlasting, as we've studied in the previous weeks. So when God says, I'm going to give this to you and to your descendants as an everlasting inheritance, he's talking about the land, and it's going to come through the generations that only come through Isaac. But the promise that he gives in chapter 12, that through you the nations would be blessed, Ishmael would be part of that. So anybody who would ever be a descendant of Ishmael, if they came to know Jesus personally, they would be an heir to the promise of chapter 12, but certainly not an heir to the promise of chapters 15 and 17. Because chapter 16 is where Ishmael comes into the picture, and Abraham is told by God directly in chapter 17, it has nothing to do with Ishmael. I don't recognize him as anything as far as an heir to this land. That's Isaac, it's not Ishmael. So let's make sure we understand that carefully. If all of mankind can be blessed because of Abraham, chapter 12, and again re-emphasized in chapter 20, which we looked at last week, because Galatians talks about the seed individual is Jesus. He's the one who blesses the nations. The national blessing, including the land, is through Ishmael. So, or not through Ishmael, I'm sorry, it is through Isaac. Ishmael is excluded from any kind of promise in any conceivable way, but any of his descendants who would come to Jesus or believe in the God of the Old Testament and be subject to the law, those people would be saved because of Jesus, not because of Isaac, not because of the land. They're separate, entirely separate things. So, then what we get here in verse 28, it says now, and here's one of the arguments that we get from the replacement theology people. Verse 28, for he is not a Jew who is one outwardly, nor is circumcision that which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew who is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the Spirit, in the Spirit, not of the letter, whose praise is not from men, but from God. So just a lot of words to say this. If we're talking about the promises of eternity in the person of Jesus Christ, that has nothing to do with your national identity. So those were the people of the circumcision. They were the people that lived according to the law. They were the people that were part of the land. They were the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the sons of Jacob. They're the ones who all the promises were given to when it comes to the land. But spiritually speaking, there were Jews who had come into knowledge of Jesus and followed him, just as there are Gentiles. But again, notice here, though Paul is making the case that the things that God had promised as far as blessing to the nations are found in Jews and Gentiles alike, nowhere here is he making the argument about the land. The land is the one thing that the replacement theology people never try to make an argument about. They never try to deal with any of that. They just act as though it doesn't even exist. But he clearly made a different promise in chapters 13, 15, and 17 of Genesis, because it deals with land and descendants, where chapter 12 just says, through you the nations, the plurality of mankind, anyone who would come to Jesus can be saved. And it's at the exclusion of Ishmael and anyone else. The promise to the land is only through one person, and that is through Isaac. but the promise of eternal life can come to all men through the person of Jesus. So Paul's the one who identifies that singular seed is Jesus. We get that in Galatians. But the only place that you see anything as being singular back in Genesis is through the person of Isaac. So there's a singular promise to Isaac, and there's a singular promise that comes through Jesus. The singular promise through Jesus is eternal life because of his sacrifice at Calvary. The singular promise through Isaac is a people and a nation and a ground and the things that are on the ground, which makes all the Old Testament passages come into our eyesight that have never yet been fulfilled, and we'll get to those in the upcoming study through this. Now, as we conclude today, let's turn to chapter 11. And as we do so, I'm going to ask you to turn to chapter 11. We're going to look at verse 11, but I'm going to ask you also to have your finger on chapter 8. At the very end of chapter 8, and I'm going to ask you to do this for one very specific reason. If you read through chapters 9, 10, and 11 in their entirety and in their full context, you'll understand that what God is saying here in those chapters is kind of a parenthetic. It's kind of like, let me take a break from what I'm dealing with here in Romans, and Paul says, I want to talk about the nation of Israel and the people in the land. I want you to know that there's something that God still has going on with them, and I do not see them as cast off. I don't see that God has completed his work with them. There's still things that are to be done. So I believe that chapters 9, 10, and 11 are a complete apologetic for him, or for the nation of Israel and the land. And again, it makes it where it's easy for us to understand that there is still future work that God is going to do with them. And how do I know that this is a parenthetic? Because look at how chapter 8 ends. Look at verse 37. In Romans 8:37, yet in all things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us, for I am persuaded that neither death nor life, angels nor principalities, powers, nor things present nor things to come, nor height nor depth, nor any created thing will be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Now look at chapter 12, verse 1. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you can prove what is the good and the acceptable and perfect will of God. Notice how that chapter 8 ends directly and chapter 12 picks up directly as well, and it's one thought. That would tell you that you could take chapters 9, 10, and 11 and make them their own separate topic within the chapter, or within the book rather. It's a parenthetic. It's while Paul says, I have this line of thought. Let me sidetrack for just a moment. Let me deal with the nation of Israel and the Jewish people in particular, of which I am one, Paul says. Chapters 9, 10, and 11 is his apologetic for the children of Israel, and that God has a future work with them. So you can see how chapter 8 transitions into chapter 12 with no seams. It's perfect in its transition, which helps you to say, I can take chapters 9, 10, and 11 by themselves and understand that Paul's making an argument that's independent but completely compatible with the rest of what he's been saying. His concern is for the people of Israel. Clearly that's the case because we see it there in chapter 2. He's wanting people to understand that what God has been talking about all along is now found in its fulfillment in the person of Jesus. Now, let's go back to chapter 11 of Romans very briefly, and let's finish today's study on as we go through this topic. So, there's this idea about being grafted in and all the rest, and people love to debate about this, that the church is grafted in, and that means that somehow that, depending on kind of a tortured reading of it, if we're grafted in, then that means that God's done with the nation. Well, let's read what he says. I say then that they have stumbled. Now, that stumbling that he's talking about is the nation of Israel. They stumbled, and that stumbling was because of Jesus and who he is and what he represented. That was a troubling thing for them. And many believed in him, but many rebelled and argued against him, and it continued to Paul's day. So that's the they is the children of Israel, the Jewish people. So it says, I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? Certainly not. But through their fall, to provoke them to jealousy, salvation has come to the Gentiles. Now, there's two words here in verse 11 that are translated into English as fall. The first one that you see, it says, I say to you that they stumbled. I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? And that's taio. And that's a way of saying that you stumble, that you trip. So there's a falling that takes place there, and it has a different feel to it. It's a verb, first of all. It's an action that takes place, and it really can potentially mean a matter that's almost ruinous. But it's not the worst of them, because look at what he says. He said, but that through their fall, and that fall there is pipto. And so a different Greek word, still a verb, and the point is, but in their stumbling, that they fell, it's opened the door. His argument is it's opened the door for the Gentiles. So everything was being run through them, and God has been doing his work through the nation there, but that nation has come to a place of stumbling, and that they themselves are in a place of unbelief. But he doesn't make it as a permanent situation. So he says, in that time, that it means that it's opened the door to the Gentiles. Now we know that that's consistent with the Gospels. Go to the Gentiles, first Judea, Samaria, then the uttermost parts of the world, that the time of the Gentiles is going to be taking place, and that's all going to be in place until there is the end of that time of the Gentiles, and God turns his attention back to the Jews. That's the book of Revelation. So that's a very Jewish book in where it all takes place, though God is judging the world worldwide. So there is this interval of time when God turns his direction towards the Gentiles, but it doesn't mean that he stops looking at Israel, which is why you have so much prophecy about things that God says he's going to do in that nation that, if we're honest with the text, has not yet taken place. So it's with that in mind we read the rest. Now, if their fall, in this case, the fall is a different word again entirely, but it's more of a noun. So it's saying that there was an active falling in verse 11, and in verse 12 it says, now the fall, the thing that happened, it's more that's the description of it. It's not the action, it's the noun, it's the description of what took place. That they stumbled at God, and that meant that they were in a place of rebellion. That fall is a rebellion. So it says, for if their fall is riches for the world, and their failure riches for the Gentiles, how much more so their fullness? So won't it be grand when God fulfills everything that he had ever said? So their failure has opened the door to the Gentiles, and it's glorious because the Gentiles get, how much more glorious will it be when God turns his attention back to them? And this is what the replacement people don't look at passages like this. That implies that there is still much more that God is going to do. So he says, for I speak to you, Gentiles, inasmuch as I am an apostle to the Gentiles, I magnify myself. His point is, this is what God's doing through me at this time. However, if by any means I may provoke to jealousy those who are my flesh, and I save some of them, or see some of them being saved. So his point is, I hope that my countrymen see me, a Jewish man, going to the Gentiles and them turning to faith in God. I hope that it provokes them to the point where they start to look into these things, because his heart is that they would come to the same conclusion. For if their being cast away is the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? So when God turns his attention back and he starts doing among them what he's done among the Gentiles, how amazing would that be? So if everything was done as far as Israel's concerned, then there's no reason for him to start to look back at them as an ethnic group of people, as a nation and as a people of a nation. He's looking at them very specifically within the borders of what we would consider Israel, that when they come back to him, so as they come back to the Lord, some of them that would. For if the first fruits is holy, then the lump is also holy, the first fruit being that nation. And so there's a holiness that's in them, even in the rebellion, because God's not done with them. So Is not the whole lump also then holy? And if the root is holy, then so are the branches. And if some of those branches were broken off, and you, being a wild olive tree, were grafted in among them, and with them you become partaker of the root and the fatness of the olive tree, do not boast against the branches. But if you do boast, remember that you do not support the root, but the root supports you. So the point is, don't look back at Israel as somehow they rejected it. Now you've got all those promises. Understand where it came from. Because again, if God, in doing his work through the nation of Israel, is a root issue, it's not a branches issue. He's made the promise to the nation, and they, the individuals and the people in that, are the branches. And so some of them have been cast off. The ones who rejected him have been cast off, but it doesn't kill the tree. If God had finished the work with Israel and gave all those promises to the church would be its own tree. It wouldn't be branches, it wouldn't be grafted in. So he goes on. So in verse 19, so you will say to the branches, you were broken off that I might be grafted in. Well said, because of unbelief they were broken off, and you stand by faith, but do not be haughty, but rather be in a place of fear or reverence. For if God did not spare the natural branches, he may not spare you. Therefore consider the goodness and the severity of God, of those who fell severity, but towards you in goodness, if you continue in the goodness, otherwise you will also be cut off. So his point is, this is all about acceptance or rejection of the person of Jesus, but it isn't even touching, once again, the land promises and the people themselves, because that's everlasting. This is purely spiritual. So I don't have a problem with saying that the promises that we see in the Old Testament are for the church if we're talking about Genesis 12. But if you're going to try to convince me that the promises of Genesis 12, or I'm sorry, Genesis 15, 13, the land, 15, the land and the person, and then 17, that person identified in the borders of what we consider modern Israel, if you're telling me that is the promise that we've been given as the church, I will disagree with you and with my last breath. Because I believe that there is no way you can try to make the case that chapter 12 of Genesis is the same as 13, 15, and 17. It just doesn't fit. Again, because if that was the case, then there's no reason for God to make a distinction between Ishmael and Isaac. Because Ishmael is completely rejected, Isaac is accepted, and he's given a land. The church has never given any such thing. That's the important part that we need to keep in mind. And it's why we don't just try to conflate everything ever said to Israel and try to make it about the church, because as we will see in our next get-together, there are Old Testament passages, and I'll give you a few examples, where clearly God says there's something that's going to happen down the road that has no historical precedent, and I will give you some of those examples. So, any questions on any of what I shared today, please contact me. The ministry's website is oldpaththeology.net, and I look forward to hearing from you if you have any questions, especially about the topics and the things that we are dealing with in the apologetics or the Bible studies themselves. I love the interaction, and please do consider our trip to Israel. Your window's kind of short. You got about 2 weeks, a little bit more, about 2.5 to 3 weeks to make your decision and to contact me about the registration, and I can get you some more details on it, but we'd love to have you join us. So I will see you again on Monday when we study through the book of Isaiah, and we pick up with our messages about, and our apologetic, I should say, about the nation of Israel. So we will talk to you and see you hopefully on Monday.